Influential figures in the community development field, such as Dwight Conquergood, Jose Roberto Guevara, Glacy C. Trenze, identify performance spaces as an important space for self-expression, education, problem-based performance, self-reflection, and many other beneficial things for people and communities. I've been part of the Boise music scene, mostly as a fan, for many years now, and have a great passion for the benefits it brings to the greater Boise community, similar to those benefits that Conquergood, Guevara, and Trienze describe in regards to performance spaces. I wanted to find out some of the major problems facing the local Boise music scene, so I sought out to put together a community organizing event to learn more about problems facing the community from fellow members of the actual local Boise music scene community. I facilitated a problem-based discussion with Carsen, a member of the local band Neocentrics.
There goes Gunboy being pushed around by some big boys who act like clowns.
Cameron Elgart, a member of the local bands The Phets.
Thoughts spill down the drain. Wonder where you've been lately. Been trying to see some.
And Crush the Monster.
I can't stand here by myself. 'Cause every drink tastes the same when I'm alone.
Wyatt Sherritt, the current general manager of University Pulse Radio at Boise State University, as well as Preston Vallis, the incoming general manager of University Pulse. Carsen and Cameron have been members of the local Boise music scene since their teenage years and have seen it change over time from the perspective of participating in various bands and musical projects, as well as being fans of bands in the area. Wyatt has also been a longtime member of the scene as a fan, and his work at Pulse has largely been in music promotion, which gives him a very multifaceted perspective of the community. Preston, also a member of Pulse, has a similar perspective, but he also comes from Tucson, Arizona. So as a non-Boise native, he can give a unique perspective on the music scene here, as well as how it compares to the scene in Tucson. I organized my project around the early stages that Paulo Freire lays out for establishing a community development project in his book Pedagogy of the Oppressed, specifically the step that describes setting up an informal meeting with community members so they can discuss what it's like to be in the community and problems they face within that community. I also used a great community development website called Community Toolbox, which provides a lot of great community development tips. I mostly used information from their first 3 toolkits, which focus on creating and maintaining coalitions and partnerships, assessing community needs and resources, as well as analyzing problems and goals, as well as a community organizing toolkit put out by the National Latino Council on Alcohol and Tobacco Prevention. These 3 sources helped me generate questions for my discussion, as well as create a general outline for my event. I began by asking the group to describe the local Boise music scene to me by telling me some of the key elements that make the scene what it is. The first buzzword that came up was accessibility. Here's what Wyatt and I had to say.
A big thing I think is accessibility. I know, especially for younger people in the state, when I was 16, 17, 18 getting into music, it was a lot about accessibility of venues. Most venues in downtown are 21 plus, which if you're 18 and 19 trying to go to shows and enjoy concerts, and the Olympics 21 plus, Neuralex is 21 plus. We had the Crux for a while. That was like really early high school for me, and that went out. But I think accessibility to shows, not being constrained by just the fact that you can't go to a bar when you're 18 or 19 to see a show, I think that's a big thing. Again, this isn't really even me speaking as a musician. I'm involved in the music scene, but not as a musician. Yeah, I think it's like accessibility, and that's, I can say on behalf of like being with the Pulse, that's what we strive to do, was to bring music that's typically harder to get for people and highlight it for students, and then specifically just in the Treasure Valley in general. So I think a big thing for me is accessibility.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with that one. I'm 21 now, so it's kind of funny how like when I was in high school and early college, I was like so mad I couldn't go places. And then once I turned 21, it was during COVID, so I wasn't really thinking about it anyway. But I'd say for sure that's a big issue and a big part of the scene.
Yeah, I turned 21 last May, so it was like, oh, I can finally go see bands at the Neurolux and the Olympic and shit, and then all of them get canceled. So
Yeah, I turned 21 in December, so it was just like, oh god. Our discussion of accessibility eventually branched off into adaptability because of the fact that a lot of venues require the attendance to be over 21, which causes many of the younger fans and musicians in the scene to create their own venues and their own DIY spaces. This is another trait that is valued by the scene that is inadvertently caused by the problem of accessibility. Cam began the discussion of this dynamic, and Wyatt followed up with his own personal experiences as well.
Yeah, there's this weird silver lining to the no venue aspect where all the bands have to do it themselves, you know? And Boise isn't super big in terms of like the music or art scene in general. You know, it's there, but it's not super lively. So everyone's just kind of homies with each other, you know? And we're all trying to like make it work. Like there's one venue in town where we can all go hang out. That's the Hive, right? Because all the other ones closed down due to COVID. And I guess the Shredder too, but even that, 2 venues isn't really enough to supply for like a valley's worth of music. So this like community like Carsen's talking about where we put together like DIY house shows or river shows or whatever, you know, I think that's really cool.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it, Wyatt.
I was going to say just that whole mentality of, you know, when I said accessibility, that there's not a lot of venues. It just means that the community has to like adapt and change to fit that we have to start doing house shows and we have to do river shows. And us with the Pulse, it's like, okay, we'll open up our offices basically to have bands come in and play because we would love to have them on air or do stuff recording with that.
Another key aspect of the local music community that got brought up is the connections made between the members of the community. Here's Carsen discussing that dynamic.
I was gonna say that one of the biggest, like, the coolest things about being in the scene is knowing people, meeting people. When I go to a show, even if like not even the musicians, like people that are there, they're super cool, and they know other people who know people who play in bands, and so you can like organize shows with them. And doing that, you're just like basically networking, and I think that's really cool.
Similar to how the topic of adaptability stemmed from the topic of accessibility, the topic of respect and support came from the connections that were formed within the music scene, the fans and the musicians associated with the scene supporting each other by going to events or helping each other find out places where they can play, or just sharing positivity and general respect for each other. Here we'll listen to Carsen, Wyatt, and myself discuss these topics.
We're gonna see it everywhere. People are gonna be super excited, and everyone's just gonna be like bringing everyone like each other up and being super supportive on each other. And I really like that about our scene is like everyone is always trying to like bring the other person up, and then like they're just sharing like positivity and like what's the word I'm thinking of? They're just like keeping them going basically.
And also going off the idea before of like community, I think that's a huge thing. Yeah, where you go to a show, like when we hosted Pulse Fest like 2 weeks ago, it was like, oh, cool. I know Cameron's over there. I know, oh, look, it's Thomas. It's like, oh, we have all the people in the Phets. It was like bands that we had playing and doing stuff with us were at that show supporting other bands also playing in the Valley. So I think like support and community also plays a really big role too.
Yeah, that's super cool. And it's cool, like, at Pulse Fest, it's cool to see like younger people and bands stand up and say, yeah, we're going to put on shows, but we're going to do it like the safe, right way. Like at Pulse Fest, everyone was super respectful. They stayed distanced, and when they wanted to dance and mosh, they kept their masks on. Like, I was really honestly surprised by that. I kind of expected a certain level of just kind of like not thinking about it too much, but I think that's really cool to see that people, they understand that if they don't do it the right way, they might not get to do it at all, and they care about the community and keeping everyone safe and healthy. So I've just really enjoyed seeing that. A final topic that everyone really likes about the Boise music scene is the diversity of different music groups that are located within the city and the city area. Cam, Preston, and Wyatt had some thoughts on this matter.
Oh, dude, totally. And like the fact that you put on the Pulse Fest where all the bands played like completely different sets too. Like that's kind of a cool thing about Boise is that you'll see like an indie band play with like a heavy metal band or a death metal band. And then you'll see like surf rock with like straight up bedroom pop. And it's like, we don't really have a choice. You know, there's no click. I mean, maybe there is, but we're all just trying to make it work. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, I was about to say I've only been here for 2 years, so I don't know too much about the music scene here. But from what I've seen, it's like so diverse. There's so many different like genres of bands here. Because like compared to like
Totally.
Tucson, where I'm from, it's very dominantly country music and then very niche like bands. It's like the whole music scene in Tucson, Arizona is very small and niche. Most of the music scene is like overshadowed by Phoenix, Arizona. But like here, it's so diverse. It's crazy.
I mean, I can just jump off of what we were saying about diversity. I remember going to Treefort one year, and there was probably 4 or 5 bands playing back to back to back, doing like 25 or 30-minute sets, and they were all speed metal bands. And I didn't really realize it, but all of them were from Boise. They were all Boise speed metal bands. It was like, I didn't even know we had 1 speed metal band from Boise. We have 5 speed metal bands from Boise. It's like Hummingbird of Death and a whole bunch of other ones.
The next section of our discussion went into talking about some of the problems in the Boise music scene. Naturally, we began with a lack of venues for everyone within the community. Here's Wyatt and Cam talking about these issues.
It just sucks. Like Death Proof Coffee, losing Death Proof Coffee. That was an amazing venue that people could go to, and it was a coffee shop. It just seems like it's weird that coffee shops keep going out of business, but bars like manage to stay open for as long as they do. Like the Crux, the Crux was awesome. And then the Crux went out, and then Death Proof went out. Just like all these coffee shops are going out, but bars are staying open. And I think it's kind of a bad situation, but it's definitely something that needs to be addressed, is keeping all ages venues in Boise.
I know for a fact that there's adults, you know, there's like fully fledged music people, you know, the people that we want to be as we get older, that are completely aware and trying to change it, you know. We talked about BAMP, you know, and the Rock School and Duck Club and Treefort. They all are all kind of in the same boat, you know. I've talked to those guys about how like, damn, we need a venue, and we are kind of in this bubble right now, you know, with this past year, obviously. So like, it's not all Boise's fault at this point. You know, the entire music scene in America right now is kind of got just swept clean, you know. A lot of indie venues across the world shut down because of COVID, right? So we're kind of sitting at the bottom of the pool, and there's nowhere way but up. And now that we're all getting vaccinated, you know, it's just a matter of time.
The lack of access for venues and playable spaces for people of all ages in the Boise music scene is clearly a big issue, but it goes even further. According to Development as Freedom by Marty Sen, he claims that being limited to an economic market is actually a form of dehumanization and oppression to individuals. And if we interpret music scenes as being markets for musicians and fans of music to access the music they want to hear, and for musicians to play the music they want to play, trying to make themselves upward mobile in their artistic endeavors, having a reduced number of venues that anyone can play at, whether you're below or above 21, is a serious handicap to personal and conscious development. The next issue that came up was the age gap presence in the Boise music scene between younger bands and older bands. We all had a lot to say about that topic, and in fact, this topic generated more discussion than any other one that day.
I wanted to point out that it seems to me that there's this rift between bands that are like 25 and older and kind of like in with the Treefort crowd and the Duck Club crowd, and bands that are like, you know, our age and younger, right? Like, not once have I heard of any of these bands that are in town reaching out to a band that is consistently playing the Hive, or a band that is consistently making music and holding house shows, and said, hey, come open for us at the Neuralex. So, or hey, come open for us at the Olympic. Because you can do that legally. You know, I've done that with my band where you can go and play a bar when you're underage. You just go play music and then you have to leave. And I think if there was more of that in the scene, or older people reaching out to younger people, um, that's how you kind of get your foot in the door to see somebody that has the resources to make a venue to say, holy shit, there's like 16-year-olds killing it right now. Maybe there's a scene here. Maybe this is profitable, because at the end of the day, like we all want to make a venue. You know, everyone wants like, oh, we need to have a venue in town. But the people that'll do it are the ones that are going to make a profit from it, because that's how you keep it alive. So I think that's a big thing that I've noticed about the scene.
That's a really good point because like when we meet people through like bands and other shows, I only meet people that are like our age or younger. I know that there's bands out there that are older, but I don't even like I've never heard of them. I don't hear much about
Right.
them. And I wonder if
Right.
that's just like a like we're just missing out on the right person to hear about them or something.
For sure. It's like, if there is a clique, it's that. It's like you're older than me.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've observed that too. Like we're talking about the metal bands. If you do go to some of the metal bands that are usually older than college age people, the audience is consistent with that demographic. It's usually older people, and there's a couple people our age. So that's pretty interesting. What do you think has caused that dynamic, or what's caused that situation? Was there anyone that made that, or any situation that made that happen?
I don't know. You know, I mean, I'm not in with them as much as I am with like my friends and the bands that are younger, I guess. But there's really no like bad blood. You know, it's not like, oh man, fuck these guys. These guys play me. Band and they're 16. I'm not going to book them. It's just like nobody's taken that step. So I'm not really sure what's caused it. Like, it could be the crux, you know, because when all of those and like the venue or whatever, when all those bands were our age, you know, there were venues and there was like a scene around. So they got like all buddy buddy, and then there was this void in time when there's like no venues and no bands. So I think it was just time, I guess. But like I met a lot of the people that make music older, and I've made music with people that are older, and it's like there's such like a potential here, such a potential for us to just kind of like kumbaya, join hands, and like pool our resources to like put Boise on the map and get noticed by somebody that's willing to like put in the resources to have an all ages venue and have like an artist collective and have all these things that this town really desperately needs.
Yeah, I was going to say that too, that there seems to be, I think one of the causes of it could just be a lack of cooperation between bands in the Valley and organizations like Duck Club in Boise that do a lot of promotion of older bands, we can say, like bands in their, you know, members within their like 26, 27, 20 years old, whatever. I think there's a lot less outreach to the younger groups, and that's kind of the see a need, fill a need that I've been trying to do the last 2 or 3 years with the Pulse, is like, oh no, there's a lot of really cool younger groups in Idaho that need representation, and we want to do that for them. So I think that could be a root cause of it, is the fact that there aren't a lot of groups in Boise, venues in Boise, groups in Boise's, artist collectives, like in the area, that are taking the time out to highlight those groups. And I don't know if it's because they think of them as like immature, or they think of them as not quality, which I think is completely BS.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if there were more groups that were pushing for collaboration between generations of musicians in Boise and just bands in general, I think that would be great. And again, this is coming from a music promotion side, not really a musician side, but I think they should be fostering those relationships.
I feel like when I started playing music when I was like 16 in Boise, I had like bands to like look up to, you know. There was like Marshall Poole, Lounge on Fire, Sunblood Stories, like all these bands that are totally in that category of like Duck Club and Treeport, that I like was like, holy shit, that's incredible, right? And I'm not really sure. I mean, with COVID, it's crazy, whatever, but like that the 16-year-olds now, you know, now that 5 years has gone by, have that like
that group to look up to and to
Yeah,
like
right.
be like, oh, I want to be doing what they're doing. It seems like if there is some kind of generational gap between the two of them, it doesn't seem like they're
Mhm.
doing a lot to carry that over, right? It seems like they have, like you said, they're Marshall Pools, Lounge on Fire, Some Blood Stories, just bands in the Boise area. And it's
Yeah,
like,
like
well,
the
they're great.
essential Boise bands, you know.
Yeah. It's like, oh, they're great musicians and great bands, but we should be pulling more people from these, startups. It's like they've been playing shows at the Hive, they've been doing house shows, they've been doing tons of stuff for years and years and years and years. Don't you think that
Yeah.
they've earned the respect of being able to be put into that same pool of musicians and bands and stuff that deserve to open for other groups in the Treasure Valley?
Yeah, talking about like just the lack of cooperation between like age groups, I feel not only is it just that lack of like cooperation and like working together, I feel it's just kind of also just that human thing where you're more comfortable about around people that like are your age group that know things that you do or like grew up doing things that you like or listening to music that you like. Because I mean, I especially see it with my dad whenever I share music with him, like newer music from artists that are released like releasing music now. He always kind of overlooks it because it's not dad rock Led Zeppelin that's like wicked crazy talented. And I just feel it's just kind of a human thing where you're just more comfortable with people that know things that you know and are your in your kind of like your generation, I guess.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
And so that's just
I
what
think,
makes it hard because it like branching out and going to like younger people, it's like uncomfortable.
yeah, um, I think it's like a generational gap, honestly, because who's to say that those bands, didn't put in the work that we're doing, trying to, get bands that were their age at the time to also kind of start the scene going. And I think we're doing the same thing right now, where we're just trying to build each other up and just like put in the work. So who's to say that we might even like be in their spot in the next couple of years?
A final problem that was discussed with the group was the fact that many bands in Boise have a very short lifespan, meaning that they break up within just a few years of their formation.
Like the scene doesn't survive if there aren't new people joining the scene because people are constantly leaving at the same rate. I remember thinking that uh just bands in recent years that it's like, oh, they aren't a thing. We said Marshall Pool, but it's like King Queen of the Losers. I looked at them and as like, oh, they're a rising band in Boise, and then King Queen of the Losers ended. So it's like I felt really sad. Then it's like, and I turn and look, and there's like 5 other bands that are just started within the last 2 years, and it's like, oh no, we're still surviving and going. It's just kind of like a natural life cycle thing. Bands get together, bands break up, bands get together, break up, whatever. It happens. And I think if we aren't fostering the younger generation of musicians and bands, then that life cycle will not continue. We will not have new groups coming into the Boise music scene if we are not fostering the relationships of young musicians coming into the music scene. So I think it's a life cycle thing, definitely.
Totally. It's cliche, but like most bands don't not make it, they break up, right? So that's just the status of music everywhere, I feel like. And I totally agree, Wyatt. I think kind of like looking out for the underdog a little bit and letting them have a platform, let the band that play their first show, you know, and have that experience. That's huge. And I think, the Pulse does a good job at that. And I'm sure it'll get better with time.
The group then moved on to proposing a series of solutions that may work to solve some of the problems we discussed. Cam, Carsen, and Preston all had ideas on how to collide the age gap between the younger bands and the older bands.
For sure. And the one thing I want to bring up is like the ball's in our court, right? So like moving forward, it's the little guy's job to take that step and like reach out and say, hey, Marshall Pool, they don't exist anymore. Hey, whatever, Wend or Blood Lemon, come play a show at my house, please. And you never know. Maybe it's a yes, and that's where that relationship is born. You think about there's no industry here, and there's no sense of like we're playing music in Boise to make it. There's nobody's moving here to get a record deal or a record contract or anything like that. So there's this. I don't want. I mean, it's like there's artistic hubs across the United States that are like that, like L.A. and New York. People go there to go and make it, right? So the fact that there's no industry here kind of brings up the sense of like, okay, we're making music because I need to, it's like because I'm an artist or I need to like write because it's part of me and I need to play shows. It's not a matter of I'm doing this to get this payoff, And I think that's why we're all kind of invested in each other because in historically, the bands that have kind of blown up out of here, they go, there's like two bands come to mind, Built to Spill in the 90s, obviously, but they were playing in Seattle all the time in Washington. And then Youth Lagoon, which blew up 2000s and went to Texas or something like that. I don't know. Moved out of town, right? So um, I am really waiting for like this community to like rise up together and get to the point where we do kind of see somebody kind of sail off from Boise, in recent times. Because in the status of the music industry now, you don't need to be anywhere to make it just because you have social media. It's because you have fucking TikTok, you can be anywhere and make it. So the second that happens, the second that the Boise sees somebody go and, do it, do the distance thing, everyone kind of gets raised up in legitimacy a little bit. Like if you think about Seattle in the 90s, nobody gave a shit about uh Seattle, it wasn't a music town. And then the grunge, Mother Love Bone, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, whatever, Pearl Jam, blow up, becomes the biggest thing in the world. And then now everyone thinks, oh, Seattle, that's Nirvana. I seriously feel like that's what Boise is now. It's that calm before the storm. And yeah.
I would totally agree with that. I think that kind of thing that happened with Seattle is going to happen to Boise like in the next couple of years. I'm pretty confident about it.
Yeah. You think about it's the number one growing city in America. And there's a bunch of people from California moving here. And all these punk ass kids that are mad at their parents are going to start writing songs. It's that simple. You could think of it in terms like that. Like the scene is only going to continue to grow. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah, it's almost like a ticking time bomb, but like a good bomb, not like a bad bomb that blows everything up. But
Yeah, maybe a bad bomb. You never know.
I don't know. Maybe.
We could get like a Nickelback band to come out of Boise. Shoot ourselves in the face.
And then our legitimacy just goes down. But
yeah.
The process that Cam just discussed actually very closely follows a process that Fanon describes in his book, Wretched of the Earth, where a culture must form a national consciousness working towards a common goal for their country in order then to later form a social consciousness where they are more community-oriented and completing goals in order to help each other out rather than achieve an overall goal for their entire nation. In the context of the Boise music scene, the first part of Cam's plan is forming that national consciousness amongst all of the musicians and fans in the music scene, saying that the younger and the older bands must come together in order to raise their legitimacy. If they, as Cam said, pool their resources, they could become more popular on a national or even international scale. So their primary motivation is more self-aligned of, okay, we will pool resources in order to push myself or my group to a higher level of recognition, which is what many bands want out of their music experience in the music scene. And through that process, they will gain a social consciousness. They'll work together. They'll look out for each other, try to play shows together, whether they're young or old. This process will create a social consciousness where no longer are they just seeking fame or fortune, which isn't necessarily bad in the context of music, but they're trying to help their community be more stable, more successful, and more developed. In regards to the problem with the lack of venues in the Boise music scene, Wyatt had some ideas from a music promoter standpoint.
Sam, I'm glad you invited myself to be in here again. I've said multiple times, not a musician, music promotion person, but it's like I think it's upon us, kind of a younger generation. Like I want to stay in music promotion in the Treasure Valley here in Boise, and it's like I see that now as like I should probably step up and join organizations where they want to promote voices and younger bands in Boise.
Cam had some ideas of his own, coming more from a performing musician view.
So I got a couple thoughts on this. I think once shows can happen again, I want to see more bands that I know and more of my friends play at the Hive. You know, when I was in high school, the Hive had this repertoire. You know, there was a lot of punk rock and just sick bands playing there. And as it kind of a couple years go by, and it kind of became this flat yet dead environment where I was going to see these people play. You know, maybe it was their first time, maybe it was their 500th time, and nobody was there. Like there's not this like community around the Hive, and the Hive just doesn't get enough credit. Maybe it's just because where it is located, you know, it's on the bench, it's not downtown, whatever. But it is a staple in the music scene where hundreds of bands practice every week, and they have a sick, brand new sound system and like a stage and like a space. Like, what more could you ask for? So, like, putting the Hive with some more legitimacy. A lot of times with my friends, I feel like I hear like, you know, it's the Hive show because, but that's not the mentality we should be taking. I feel, and then also, so there's one venue. Let's play there. Playing in your garage, playing in your backyard, inviting your friends over. Like once shows happen or can happen safely according to CDC or whatever, like let's do it. Like go play downtown, hook up a generator, hook up a car battery. Like there's nobody stopping us but us as the community. We just got to kind of take that step, like just do it ourselves. So that's the kind of the two band-aids on the situation that I want to see happen.
According to the works of Conquergood, Trenze, and Guevara, putting on more DIY shows would be very beneficial for the Boise music scene. It allows for performances to be put on by members of the community, which make them more effective in delivering a message. This work would further help solve some of the other problems in the scene because shows could be used as a platform to talk about the need for older and younger bands to get together, the need for more venues, the need for bands to support each other as much as they can so that bands can stay together longer. It could also be a good platform for a problem-based discussion, whether it's between bands, fans, through lyrics of the songs, or just general discussions that often occur between attendees at these shows. It could bring up a lot of great problems that we've discussed in this podcast or other ones we haven't discussed at all that are facing the Treasure Valley and the Boise scene, and it'd be a great opportunity for attendees to talk about these problems. The DIY ethic creates a more democratic process, which is an idea further described by Conquergood, Trenze, and Guevara, specifically Trenze and Guevara, of how performances do have this ability and should have a responsibility to create a more democratic system within a community. And DIY shows do exactly that. It gives the power back to those who want to go to shows and those who are playing at shows. They are choosing where to do the show, who wants to come, should they limit who comes, should they not. It becomes much of a more democratic, hands-on experience rather than having a promoter decide who gets to play where, when, and why. Putting on more shows at lower access venues or lower known venues such as the Hive or any others that might come up and form once COVID blows over a little bit more would be very beneficial for Boise, as Cam previously described, for his reasons and the reasons I just described according to my sources. The solutions that we discussed for connecting younger and older musicians and keeping venues available for people of all ages in the Treasure Valley were really the same solutions for keeping from bands from breaking up. Because if you can connect more people to create a more support-based platform, and if you can keep venues open for even more support for musicians having a place to play and grow themselves, that's really what's keeping them from breaking up. Many bands get discouraged and feel they have no one to play to, or no one's coming to their shows, they don't feel supported, they're not getting some of the positive reinforcement we talked about earlier. So really, it's connected to the other problems and shares a common ground of solutions with venues, connectiveness between ages, and keeping your band together as long as you can.
You got a lot of nerve to wear that smile. The light only shines through when you close your eyes.
In the context of the Boise music scene and my project, Anthony Ware's definition of community development I feel is most appropriate. He focuses on community development as critical awareness raising, focused on empowerment, with community development as an approach to enlarge capabilities, build human rights awareness, extend the agency of individuals within a social context. The process he describes should ideally be highly participatory, localized, community-led approaches that aren't super expensive. They're low cost, that work with locals, encourage self-reliance, and I think that makes complete sense in a musician semi-DIY context. Musicians banding together isn't expensive, and it actually saves money when you're pooling resources. It's very important considering local musicians typically aren't the richest within a city economic community ranking. There's so much I've learned in the process of this project, and so much that's been reinforced through courses I've taken here at Boise State University. I've really seen how problems have positive and negatives associated with every solution. Like, we're looking at supplying the Boise area with more venues. Well, Boise has this great DIY scene. If we all of a sudden have 15 awesome venues downtown available for all ages and they're affordable to go to, that's awesome, but maybe people in the music scene will be less motivated to have house shows and cool shows set up by the river, or Pulse Fest, a little festival that University Pulse put on outside. And, you know, they also, as Wyatt was saying earlier, do shows in the office, and that's something that is really fun and respected in the music scene. So there's a lot to think about when you're proposing a solution. It's important to talk to everyone and have them consider those positive and negative outcomes. Another thing I realized is in my first semester of college, my very first urban studies course, it was an urban studies in the environment course, and that's my major, urban studies and community development, was my professor really hammered into our heads that one of the main topics that must be considered with urban studies is interconnectedness. And everything we've talked about with Cam, Carsen, Preston, and Wyatt, all these problems have been interconnected. The age gap, younger and older musicians aren't connecting, so younger musicians have a harder time playing at venues, and there's less support because of this. It's all connected. And I think I've just learned so much through this process about community development and about one of the most important things in my life, the local Boise music scene, something I hope to be part of for the rest of my life. So, just to wrap things up, I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank my professor for this project, Christopher Corthane, for giving me one of the best college classes I've ever had, an opportunity for me to grow as an individual, and everyone, you know, along the way. This is one of the longest media podcast projects I've ever done, and I know it can be a bit shoddy in places I'm not the most experienced, but I also really want to thank Wyatt, Preston, Cam, and Carsen. I've interviewed Cam and Carsen in the past, and I've worked with Wyatt and Preston a lot through Pulse, and I just really appreciate the time they put into this. We interviewed for 45 minutes, and they allowed me to complete my project with their cooperation and allowed me to grow as a person through this. And I especially just want to thank everyone as part of the music scene. It's been such a tough time. I did a podcast similar to this topic about a year ago when COVID was just ramping up, and it was hard not going to shows, and it was hard hiding away, and we're still doing it. So I want to thank everyone who's stuck in there, everyone who plays these shows, is writing songs. As Cam said, the punk-ass kids who are mad at their parents, you guys are great. Just keep doing what you're doing, and I hope to see you soon. Thank you so much.
And I'm told